Welcome to Untold, a podcast about Utah's boldest entrepreneurs and business leaders. Their behind-the-scenes battles, breakthroughs, and what the heck were we thinking moments. These are the stories you'll wish you'd heard about the businesses you might not have known were right next door. With me today is the founder of Roxberry Juice Company, Brad Davis. Thanks for joining me today, Brad.
My pleasure, John. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. You know, I think that on this podcast, you're the first lawyer that I've interviewed.
Oh, no. Maybe we need some lawyer jokes or something.
I don't have a lawyer joke.
Don't hold that against me.
Okay, I won't. I don't have a lawyer joke, but I have been deposed before.
Have you really?
Now, this podcast is not going to be like that. It's not going to be a deposition.
No.
I do have to admit a little bit of sick enjoyment I have of actually asking the questions of the lawyer for a minute.
There you go. I've sat through many depositions, and most of them are very boring. Occasionally, you'll find an exciting one, but hopefully this isn't one of those boring ones.
No, let's make sure it's not. Well, awesome. So, yeah, thanks for joining. And so Roxberry's is a franchise. So now you're right. Selling the franchises. You're a franchisor. Right. You've been on the other side of the table too, right? Tell us a little bit about that, and then how does being on both sides of this equation, how has it influenced how you've set up Roxberry?
Gosh, that's an awesome question. And to be honest, given the fact that we've been on both sides as a franchisee and a franchisor, it gives us a really unique perspective, John, that I don't think many franchisors have. For example, like when I walked away from practicing law and we jumped into the restaurant world, it was with a company called Zuka Juice, Zuka Juice. And it was headquartered in Salt Lake, and we were a startup. And we grew that through our franchise organization to 110 stores before we sold it to Jamba Juice. And so my first entry into restaurant world was squarely on the franchisor side of things. And I was the in-house attorney, and I was in charge of all development, all the franchising and developing stores. And so I didn't have that perspective of what it's like to be a franchisee. And looking back on it, I don't think I was as empathetic to franchisees as I think I should have been. Because then over the course of the years after we sold Jamba Juice, then we went on to found another company, and then ultimately I became a franchisee of Subway sandwiches, and there's another really strong Utah brand called Costa Vida Mexican Grill, and so I was a large franchisee for these organizations, and I realized as a franchisee, you're on the front lines. That's where the action happens, good, bad, or ugly. And oftentimes I felt like the franchisor was out of touch, and they would impose upon us rules and regulations and processes and price points and products that didn't necessarily work at the street level. It might look great in some glass tower, office complex, but when it came right down to it, maybe they didn't think it through as well as they should have. And so this time around with Roxberry, obviously I'm still a franchisor, but I have that franchisee mentality where if I'm going to err on either side, I try and err on the side that protects the franchisee more. So it's a unique perspective for sure.
That's good. Is that something that you talk with people about up front, or is that something that people learn as they work with you?
I'm sure that I've talked about it up front to a number of people, but there's probably some that I haven't talked to them about it. And hopefully they learn that about us. And we enjoy a great relationship with all of our franchisees, and hopefully that's because they feel like we're trying to be fair with them. Our goal is to just move the brand forward and create more awareness and create this buzz around Roxberry. And what I can't promise is that everything that we do, a franchisee is going to love and enjoy and and welcome it with open arms. But what we can promise, and what I always promise, is that we listen really hard and long. And to be honest, many of our products that we enjoy today were brought to our attention by franchisees. And John, you may have heard this. This is an old saying. A lot of people have heard this, but the Egg McMuffin at McDonald's was a franchisee innovation. And how stupid McDonald's would have been if they said, no, hey, that's my job. I don't want you to innovate. I just want you to, to perform. And so we've learned, from instances like that where we've got to listen. And so we have a whole smoothie line of green smoothies. When we started Zuka Juice and we grew to 110 stores, John, we had no vegetable-based products at all. It was all fruit. And so my mindset when I started Roxberry was, let's just mimic what we did with Zuka. We had 110 stores. We grew huge, And a few years after starting, I had a franchisee approach me and say, you know what, we need some green smoothies. And my inclination was, no, we don't. What are you talking about? But it took them a couple times, but they kept asking. At the same time, my wife was begging me to do it. So we ultimately launched what we call our original green smoothie. And John, it became the best-selling product we had, to the point where now we have a whole line of green smoothies, and now we do acai bowls and all kinds of things. But franchisees are a huge and valuable source of information, and so we have to be open to their thoughts. We can't say yes to everything, but we certainly can promise that we're going to listen and learn, for sure.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I did not know about the Egg McMuffin. That's cool. But I'm not surprised. I think usually the people who are in the trenches, hearing the customers, those are the people you need to be listening to.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious. This is a great segue into a question I had about franchisees and owners. What do you think the biggest difference is between somebody who does really well as a franchise owner and somebody who does okay?
Great question. And I think there's a couple of different answers. Some people are entrepreneurial enough that they want to own their own business, but not so entrepreneurial that they want to start from scratch. It's a leap of faith either way, but it's a little bit more risky to start something that hasn't been proven before. So we try and attract those that they're trying to get away from the daily grind and their employee status, and they want to go out on their own, and they're anxious and risky enough to hang out their own shingle, but they want to do something that's been tried and true and is proven. And so we bring our system to them. And they own their own business, they set their own hours, they hire their own team, they run their own show, but within our guidelines and within our history of success. Those are the typical franchisees that we like. Sometimes someone will squeeze through the cracks a little bit, that maybe they're more entrepreneurial than they thought they were, and they start coming in and they'll second guess the system. And there's a subtle balance, because to be honest, we don't want a bunch of yes men or women out there. We want people that will challenge us and make sure that we're making the right decisions going forward, because I firmly believe that the day you stop evolving as a brand is the day you start dying. So we absolutely have to continue to innovate, and we want to rely on our franchisees to help us with those innovations. But when it comes to, some franchisees have come to us and said, well, I want to, here's a perfect example. I had a franchisee come to us and say, I want to sell pancakes in the morning. And, we are a fresh juice smoothie and acai concept. We don't have any, ovens or anything like that. So, I had to tell him, I said, look, man, I love your enthusiasm. I appreciate the idea, but we can't do pancakes. And it was hard on him because I had to tell him no. But he's a very innovative guy, and he kind of wanted to do his own thing. And so sometimes we have to say no, And so I think that the difference between someone that can be really successful as a franchisee and someone that can't is someone that's willing to abide within the boundaries of what we're doing, okay? And they can see the passion and the growth and the plan for what we're doing. That same guy that wanted to do pancakes, he ultimately sold his store, and we've remained friends over the years, and he's come back and said, Brad, man, I wish I just followed your system. And so I guess that's the key. If people that are not willing to follow a system probably don't belong in a franchise, because every system, whether you're McDonald's or Subway or Roxberry, you have to have a system. And the plan is that the customer who has fallen in love with your brand and fallen in love with your products, they can go to any one of your stores, regardless of what city it's in, and feel confident that they're going to get the same product.
Yeah.
And the reason, because we followed the same recipe, we followed the same process and procedure to create that product. And if we have a rogue franchisee that's buying a substandard strawberry or not fulfilling the procedure like it should be, you're not going to get the same result. You're going to get two products that aren't the same. And in a franchise organization, that doesn't work. We have to be consistent.
So you got a roadmap, right? And a kind of a way to help people to get the basics right. So where is it that somebody can make a difference and make their location more profitable, or a better location than another location?
That's an awesome question, and I have a perfect answer for you. We have a store here in Utah that is about 5 years old. Okay, so it's a pretty mature store, and it was about middle of the road in terms of sales. So it was a good performing store, profitable store, but not like on the high end and not on the low end. So it was a good performing store. And typically, a store that's been open about 5 years, it's kind of matured, and the way it's performing is typically the way it will always perform. It'll increase every year, but maybe not at the rate some of these other stores do. Well, last year, that store was sold to a husband and wife. And that husband and wife were very passionate about Roxberry, and they wanted to be involved in the community. And they wanted to make a difference with that store. They wanted to take the operations and the culture up a notch. And so they jumped into that store, and both of them had other jobs too, so they weren't spending 24/7 in that store. But they literally spent time with the team and became really, from a culture standpoint, built this amazing team and this amazing organization. And then they would go do events with the city. They would sponsor 5 and 10K runs. They would get involved with the local schools, in particular the elementary schools. And they have, from the moment that they bought that store, every single month since then, going on 14 months in a row, they have increased sales 30% over the prior year. And that doesn't happen by accident, John. That happens with the deliberate, conscientious effort. But it proves that even a mature store with a different culture and a different mentality and kind of a raise the bar, hopes and desires, they can do it. Those are the franchisees that are involved and can make a difference for sure.
That's great. That's a great story. Yeah, you mentioned that you haven't always been in the entrepreneurial space. That you were practicing law actually. Correct. When you started and left the practice. So, what did practicing law? How did it help you decide to move into entrepreneurial ventures, and what did it teach you?
Well, that's a really good question. I'll tell you. I found great joy and great satisfaction practicing law. I was a litigator, and so I would have to, typically every Friday, I was in court, in front of a judge, arguing our position on behalf of my clients. And in order to be prepared for Fridays, you had a lot of work to do Monday through Thursday in the law library to make sure that you understood what the position you were fighting for, and that you anticipated the defenses or the arguments against you. And so for me, the reason there's two reasons I really left the practice of law. Number one, I was raised in a very entrepreneurial home. My father owned his own construction company, and I grew up on the job site with him, and I saw how hot he burned, when it came to getting things done. And he was like getting up at 4:30 in the morning type guy, and we were always tagging along with him, and he would always tell me, you make your own way in life. You can't wait for anybody to do it for you. And so I kind of had that upbringing, and so I always kind of felt that pull, kind of coming, at my heart, that I wanted to do my own thing. But then when I started practicing law, man, I was achieving all of my goals, all of my financial goals, all of my career goals. But one thing that I wasn't achieving, John, quite honestly, was being a good father and being a good husband. And I worked a lot of hours. It was not uncommon, to work 60, 80 hours a week to prepare. And quick story, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One day, it was a Saturday, and very typical, I go to work, and I went to work, and I'm working away, and about 8 o'clock at night, I'm filling out what are called your billable hour reports, where you kind of document, okay, I'm working on this case, and this is what I did, and how many hours I worked. And I looked at the calendar, and John, it was my son's birthday. It was his third birthday. And I realized that particular day and many days, I was prioritizing work over my family. And so I made the decision. I had this big epiphany right then. I need to change what I'm doing. While I was successful, I was way successful. I was achieving all these career goals. I was ignoring my family goals, and that didn't work for me. And I realized, man, if I I don't want to be successful in one area and a failure in another. So I made a decision right then and right there that I was going to walk away. And within 3 months, I was living in California at the time. I moved to Utah, cut my salary in half, and jumped into the restaurant world with this company called Zuka Juice. It was crazy, but I've never looked back. And it's I wanted to be present in my family's life. I wanted to coach my son's games and be at my daughter's recitals, and I was able to make that happen, fortunately, with that lifestyle change.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, a startup is not usually like a relaxed lifestyle either, but you've got that freedom to be able to make choices.
Yeah, I mean, to be sure, there were still events that I missed, and there were still longer hours, but I was able to dictate those hours. I was now the boss, right? I was able to say, okay, this is when I work and this is when I play. And it was a little easier to navigate that. When you're practicing law, there's a big, at least for me, I took it crazy seriously. And when I promised my client that I was going to be there for them and I was going to protect them legally, I was going to do everything I can to, to make sure that they came out on top, there was, I had to, I worked all those extra hours, and after a while I realized, man, while I did good as an attorney, and I feel I feel very good and proud of the time that I was as a lawyer, and that I went the extra mile for my clients. Personally, I would rather go the extra mile for my family. Yeah. That's where I kind of had to draw the line.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and you've taken that, I think, another degree further. When we first met, I learned that now you're running, Roxberry's a family business. You've got your family involved in the business. So tell me about that, and then tell me about the upsides, and maybe what are some of the challenges of Sure. working with family.
Well, unfortunately, I have nothing but upside. Unfortunately, I get the privilege every day to work side by side with my son, and that that is the one thing that I cherish probably most. It's awesome to own your own business. It's awesome to see that you've created a success, but when you're able to, shoulder to shoulder, work with your son, it's pretty cool. Like, I highly recommend it if you can. But from when we created Roxberry, we created it in my garage. I told my wife we're not gonna park our cars in the garage for a while, and we basically built a juice bar in the garage, and we would invite all our friends and neighbors over, and we would have these smoothie parties where we would come up with all these different concoctions, and we had little slips of paper that said, I like this, I don't like that, here's a suggestion. And so from a very early age, my kids were running with the business with me. I've got this picture of my daughter. I think she's 12 years old, and she's got a Roxberry hat and a Roxberry uniform on, and she was running the cash register like 12 years old. So they grew up in that environment, very entrepreneurial environment, and it taught them leadership skills, and it taught them skills to interact with their coworkers, and it taught them skills to interact with customers, some of which aren't happy all the time if they're not getting their product as timely as they want, or if heaven forbid we made a mistake, then they're screaming at my 12-year-old or my 14-year-old son. But they learned how to navigate that world at a very young age, and I think that's bode well for them as they've grown and as they've matured and as they've done business for themselves. I guess some of the cons, if there are any, at least for me, it's you do work longer hours as a business owner, and there are even though I was at a lot more events than I was as an attorney, there are still some events that I missed as a business owner, and there's a little bit of a trade-off, when you own your own business and the power goes out on the weekend. There's no one to call. You're it. You're like, I got to get down there and fix it. So there are times when the ox is in the mire, so to speak, where you've got to show up and perform because no one else is in line to do so. So there's pros and cons, but overall, man, it's been overwhelmingly a wonderful, positive, amazingly happy experience for us.
So it sounded like you were describing, even before you completed the idea, you had the name Roxberry for what you were trying to build.
Believe it or not, I didn't.
No.
That came later. While we were focused on trying to create the recipes and the process and the everything in the menu. I had a pad of paper. That I carried with me everywhere I went, and I literally wrote down every name. And I should have kept that. It's just for nostalgia purposes, but it was almost full. And I kind of, out of the process of elimination, I knew I wanted it to start with an R because I liked the way that sounded, and I wanted somehow to tie it a little bit from a branding standpoint to what we do. And so ultimately landed on Roxberry, and the berry part of it is more descriptive, as we work with a lot of berries and fruit, and so Roxberry just kind of was the hardest part, to be honest, to come up with that name.
So I'm curious, when you were in your garage and you're having the neighborhood parties, do you remember a complete failure, like something you were trying out and that everybody just said, "Dude, no way"?
I think the first round of smoothies was kind of a failure. That first party that we had, we invited a bunch of people over, and I remember just reading people's faces and looking at their aura, and I don't think I was overwhelming anybody. I thought, dang, what is Brad doing, man? He's going to lose his shorts, because I don't think we pleased anybody that day. But it was a good experience to go through, because I realized, okay, sometimes what sounds good in my head, doesn't translate to reality. So we had to go back to the drawing board a number of times to get it right.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, so at first people were like, "Oh man, what the hell is he doing?"
I think
here?
they felt sorry for me. They thought, what's this guy doing, walking away from practicing law and all this stuff? Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
Oh, that's great. So another curiosity, I think I was scrolling around on LinkedIn or maybe on your website, and I ran into a situation I haven't yet run into in one of these interviews. I saw that you had expanded into Korea, or you were planning to, and I haven't talked to anybody who's done like an international expansion, especially one into like, cross Pacific. Right. So what happened, and like what lessons would you have for somebody who's thinking about international expansion?
I'll tell you what, it's interesting you asked this question, because just today, the guy that I was potentially working with connected with me again on LinkedIn. But the story there is this. So I'm a member of the Mormon church, the LDS church, and I served an LDS mission in South Korea in the 1980s, a long time ago. And I just fell in love with the country. I fell in love with the culture, and South Korea very much loves America. We were treated like royalty over there. It was a great experience, and it was humbling, and it was an awesome experience. And I always told myself I kind of wanted to do business there if I had the opportunity. And so with Roxberry, I knew, because Roxberry is kind of very Americana, nostalgic, kind of that kind of feeling with it. It's like bringing you back to this time in life when everything was more simple and less convoluted. And I knew that would sell well in Korea. So I reached out to a gentleman that was doing business and kind of brokering deals in Korea. And we made the introduction, and he was excited, and things were progressing really fast. And this is pre-COVID, right? And so we got introduced to this gentleman in Korea, and he was doing Subway sandwiches in Korea. And he was very much enamored and really liked Roxberry. And so we start this negotiating stage of what it's going to take for him to take Roxberry to Korea, both financially and culturally and physically and emotionally, all of the above. And he asked for the world. He really wanted, he wanted all these rights to all of Asia. He wanted really more than I was willing to give up. And in retrospect, I should have just given it to him, because I didn't have any ties in the other country. The only country I had any real feelings for was Korea. And so I ultimately told him no. I said, I think we're going to go a different direction. And then guess what happened? All of a sudden COVID hits, and all those other options that I had dwindled. And I don't know if you remember, but Korea was hit particularly hard with COVID, yeah. And they really, in fact, I had a plane ticket scheduled to leave to go to Korea. I had a pitch deck of 5 companies that wanted to do business with Roxberry in March of 2020. And if you might, and I was leaving on I think it was the 20th or the 21st of March, and really, at least for me, it hit on the 14th of March, and yep. So all of a sudden we couldn't fly to Korea, and all these deals fell through. And these years later, I've realized, the art of making a deal is not winning on all things that you want to win on. It's finding a good partner that you believe is going to represent your interests well. So I've got some regrets. I should have done that deal, and I think if I had done that deal, Roxberry would probably be in a different place internationally than it is today, because we're nowhere internationally today, and we would have been.
Oh, yeah. So yeah. Kind of, yeah, interesting. So I'm curious if, you've got the legal background, right? And negotiation,
I think
sometimes can be thought of as like a win-lose sort of a thing. Was that,
yeah.
Do you think that was part of the lesson?
I think so. I think I let myself get in my own head a little bit, and I was acting like Roxberry was this big, and it was Roxberry's this big, and I don't know if this guy could have performed to the extent he wanted to, but when we reconnected today, actually it's so interesting you're asking me this question. he's been crazy successful with other brands that he's done in Korea. And so no doubt, in my opinion, it was even more of a gut check that I should have done business with him. He's a really, really good man, and he had really good insights and knowledge. And so that's one of those deals where I let my mind instead of my instincts, follow through.
Well, cool. That's awesome. Hopefully the door's not shut. It sounds like the door's not shut. And
you learn from every experience. And my father always taught me, you either get better or you get bitter, right? And so I have just always chosen, and I've taught my kids, guys, look, life's going to throw you a lot of curveballs. And, sometimes you're going to be on the bad end of that curveball. And you can look at it as a failure, or you can look at it as like, okay, that was just one less success than I had, and I'm gonna get better because of it, rather than getting bitter as a result.
Great. Well, opportunity for you to exercise that.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Cool. So I'm curious, as you think about, you don't have to expose your plan to take over Asia, but I am curious, where do you see Roxberry, as you think about the next 5 years? What do you think will be the focus for you in Roxberry, or do you think you'll be doing other things in addition to?
I think I'm squarely on the Roxberry train right now, and we set a goal recently to sell 20 new franchise deals within the next 18 months. For a long time, Roxberry was on the back burner. Roxberry's 17 years old, John. We started it in 2008, but you might recall in 2009 there was a really, really bad recession.
Yeah.
So we grew really fast. We grew 3 stores in 2008, and then I was 100% focused on Roxberry. But then this recession hit, and I didn't know if it were the scope or the length or the details of the recession. So I just kind of said, okay, we're not gonna grow Roxberry for a little bit. We're just gonna kind of see how this economy goes. And while that happened, I was asked to do a bunch of consulting jobs with some of my cohorts, and so as a result of doing some consulting work, I ultimately was tapped to become the president of a company called Abundant Brands. That was a large, we had like 300 Subway sandwich stores, and then we became the largest franchisee for Costa Vida Mexican Grill. And so my day-to-day was Costa Vida and Subway, and Roxberry was squarely on the back burner. And while we still supported the brand, it wasn't something that we were conscientious about growing. We had a few franchisees that wanted more stores over the years, so we grew a little bit here and there. But it wasn't until after like 10 years later, 12 years later, that it was in 2019 that we decided to sell out of everything else and focus 100% on Roxberry. So I think it was August of 2019, we said, all right, it's time to focus on Roxberry. This brand is so worthy of growth. It's got such strong DNA in Jamba Juice and Zuka Juice that we elected to grow. And then, weirdly enough, a few months later, 6 months later, COVID hits. And COVID obviously took everybody by surprise, shut the world down. And so we had to pivot a little bit, and we kind of put our growth goals on hold for a while. And then, I don't know if you know, but after COVID, the storm of COVID kind of settled a little bit, it created this crazy supply chain management issue.
Oh, yeah.
Where, it was all of us to try and get the right strawberry, And so we went straight from COVID, lockdowns to kind of supply chain lockdowns. And so, all this time, these last 3 or 4 years, we've kind of been, putting our growth goals on hold while we're just shoring up, all the supply chain problems. Well, now those are all solved, and we figured it all out, and we're all good. And so it's time to grow again. And so my son and I have just set a goal to light up the jets again and start franchising in earnest. And we feel like, we're in Utah and Idaho today, but we're opening up Arizona and Nevada, and Colorado and Texas, and any state that from a supply chain standpoint and from a franchisor support standpoint that we can do business at a high level.
Okay. Wow, that's cool. So I didn't realize it was that old. So it was almost like on hold. It was the sleeper franchise waiting over there until the conditions were right.
Yeah, it was on purpose. We weren't actively pursuing growth, but we had people that would, we've never advertised for franchising until recently, but we had people that saw it and said, I want to be part of that. And so I think before COVID, we had 15 or 16 stores. And then since COVID, we've grown. We have 25 stores today. So we've grown a little bit here and there, even though we haven't, conscientiously tried to grow. But now, with our mindset that, we're going to ramp it up a little bit, raise the bar, I think you're going to see some good growth from us.
That's cool. And what do you think? What do you think is going to be the most important key to that growth being successful?
I think that's multifaceted. Number one, we have to be judicious about who we select as franchisees. Again, it goes back to that question a little bit earlier. You want people that are entrepreneurial enough to jump in, but not so entrepreneurial that they're going to disrupt the system. And so I think choosing the right franchisees and to maintain our culture is really, really important. And then not prioritizing growth over competence. We absolutely want to grow for sure, but we want to do it one profitable store at a time. And we need to learn to kind of crawl before we walk, and we need to walk before we run, and we got to do things in order chronologically so that we don't get speed wobbles and problems as we grow. So it's important, and I've done it before. So we know what we're doing, but at the end of the day, it's just being a real conservative and taking things as they come rather than forcing the issue and trying to go too fast.
Awesome. Well, great. So you mentioned you're kind of turning the lights on, if you will, to people who might be interested in this kind of thing. So if somebody's listening to this and is interested in learning more about Roxberry as a franchisee, or just learning more about the stores and where to get one, where would you send them?
Yeah, good. Thank you for asking. First of all, it's interesting to say we have 25 stores, 23 of which are in Utah. Okay, so we have 2 in Idaho, the Boise kind of area.
Yeah.
But even though Utah has 23 stores, I think we can build 40 more stores in Utah alone. Okay, so all you Utah entrepreneurs, there's a lot of room left in Utah to grow. So reach out to us, man. I'll tell you what, you can either reach out to myself or my son. My email is brad@roxberryjuice.com, ROXBERRYJUICE.com, or my son is Braden@roxberryjuice.com, and his name is BRADEN@roxberryjuice.com. Real simple. Or you can reach out on the website. We've got information there as well. So yeah, reach out to us. We'd be happy to explore it with you.
Awesome. Well, cool. And I really appreciated the time today. I hope it didn't feel like a deposition.
Far from it, my friend. No, this was awesome. I appreciate you. You've asked some great probative questions. Thanks for the time that you've dedicated to us.
No, really appreciate it. Thanks, Brad, and best of luck with the growth goals and continuing to enjoy every step with your son.
We need some stores up your way. Aren't you in the Ogden area?
I am in Ogden, yeah.
We need some stores up that way. We don't have anything close to you.
I've
the
got
closest store we have is one in West Haven, which is a little ways from you. So there's plenty of room up your way. Spread the word for us.
Will do, my friend. All right. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks. Take care.